I found the hidden camera on a Tuesday morning while trimming the hedges along my fence line, and my first thought was that someone was spying on my wife. My name is Lucas Rollins, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision in Scottsdale, Arizona, for 3 years without major issues. Sure, the HOA was strict about lawn height and mailbox colors, but nothing prepared me for what I discovered that morning. The small black device was wedged between 2 slats of my wooden fence, angled directly toward my backyard patio where we spent most evenings. It was not a casual placement. Someone had deliberately positioned it to capture audio and video of my property. My hands shook as I pulled out my phone and started recording. I documented the camera from every angle, careful not to touch it yet. The device was professional grade, not some cheap toy from a big box store. It had a small solar panel on top and what looked like a memory card slot on the side. My mind raced through possibilities. A jealous neighbor, some creep targeting my wife, Jennifer. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. There was a small white sticker on the back of the device with printed text, "Property of Meadowbrook Estates, HOA Equipment 3. I stood there in my yard, hedge trimmers still in one hand, phone in the other, trying to process what I was seeing. The HOA was recording my property. But why? We kept our lawn immaculate, our house painted in approved colors, our garbage cans hidden from street view. We followed every ridiculous rule in their 70-page covenant handbook. I carefully removed the camera and brought it inside, setting it on my kitchen counter. Jennifer was at work, teaching 4th grade at Desert Vista Elementary, and would not be home for another 5 hours. I needed to think this through carefully. My first instinct was to call the police, but I wanted to understand the full scope of what was happening before involving authorities. I examined the camera more closely. It was a Ridgeview Pro 400, a model I recognized from my brief stint working security during college. These units could record continuously for weeks on solar power and had excellent audio pickup within 50 feet. Someone could monitor conversations from a significant distance. The memory card was still inside, a 128 GB model that could hold hundreds of hours of footage. My laptop sat on the dining room table, and I made a decision that might have been legally questionable but felt necessary. I ejected the memory card and inserted it into my computer. The files were organized by date, going back nearly 2 months. 2 months of surveillance on my property without my knowledge or consent. I started with the most recent files, skipping through hours of footage. Most of it showed my empty backyard during the day while we were at work. Then I saw clips from evenings when Jennifer and I sat outside talking, having dinner, or just relaxing. The audio quality was crystal clear. Every word we said had been captured. I kept scrubbing through files, looking for something that would explain why the HOA was doing this. Then I found it. About 3 weeks back, there was a file that had been edited and marked with a star. I opened it and felt my stomach drop. The video showed my backyard on a Saturday afternoon. I remembered that day clearly because our nephew Tyler had visited, and he had brought his Bluetooth speaker to play music while we grilled burgers. The music had not been loud. We had kept it at a reasonable volume, the kind you would hear at any suburban barbecue. But someone had edited this footage. I watched in disbelief, as the audio levels on the video had been artificially amplified. The music, which had been pleasant background noise in reality, sounded like a raging party in the edited version. Worse, there were segments where the video jumped. Someone had cut out the quiet moments and spliced together only the parts where the music was playing, making it seem like we had blasted it for hours without break. In reality, we had turned it off completely around 6 in the evening. The edited video made it look like we partied until 9. My hands clenched into fists. This was not just surveillance. This was fabrication of evidence. Someone in the HOA was manufacturing violations against us. I kept digging through the files and found more. Another edited video from 2 weeks prior showed me using my lawnmower. The original timestamp showed I had mowed at 3 in the afternoon on a Wednesday, which was perfectly within the allowed hours according to HOA rules. But the edited version had the timestamp changed to show 7 in the morning, before the 8 o'clock noise restriction lifted. They had doctored the metadata. There were at least 6 edited videos total, all showing manufactured violations that never actually occurred. My mind spun with questions. Who was behind this? Why target us specifically? What was their end game? I copied all the files to my computer into 3 separate flash drives. If this was going to become a legal matter, I needed backups. Then I did something that surprised even myself. I put the memory card back in the camera, exactly as I had found it, and went outside to reinstall it in the fence. If the HOA did not know I had discovered their surveillance, I could gather more evidence. I could catch them in the act of editing more footage or perhaps find out who was behind this scheme. I positioned the camera exactly as it had been, taking careful measurements to ensure I replaced it precisely. Back inside, I started researching Arizona law regarding surveillance and privacy. What I found was enlightening and infuriating. Arizona was a one-party consent state for audio recording, but video surveillance of someone's private property without consent was a different matter entirely. The law clearly stated that recording someone in a place where they had a reasonable expectation of privacy, like their fenced backyard, could constitute illegal surveillance. The fact that the HOA was doing it made the situation even more complex. I also researched HOA law in Arizona. Homeowner associations had broad powers, but they were not above the law. They could not violate federal or state statutes, and they certainly could not fabricate evidence of violations. What they were doing could potentially be considered fraud, harassment, and invasion of privacy. Jennifer came home around 4:30, and I met her at the door with a grim expression. She immediately knew something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked, setting down her bag filled with student papers. I led her to the laptop and showed her everything. She watched the edited videos with growing horror, her hand over her mouth. When I finished explaining, she sank into a chair. "Why would they do this to us?" she whispered. "We have done everything they asked. Remember when they made us repaint the shutters because they said our beige was 0.3 shades too dark? We spent $800 to fix that." "I have been thinking about it all day," I said. "The only thing I can come up with is that incident 6 months ago." Jennifer's eyes widened. The board meeting. 6 months earlier, we had attended an HOA board meeting to contest a fine we received for having our garbage cans visible from the street. The fine was $150, and it was absurd because our cans had been out for less than an hour on collection day. A neighbor had apparently photographed them at 7 in the morning and reported us. The rules stated cans could not be visible from the street except on collection day, which technically we were following. At that meeting, I had stood up and respectfully pointed out the inconsistency in how rules were enforced. I had brought photos showing at least a dozen other houses with far worse violations that went unfined. I had questioned why we were being targeted when others seemed to get away with worse infractions. The HOA president, a woman named Patricia Kendrick, had not appreciated my presentation. She was exactly what you would picture when someone says, "HOA Karen." Mid-50s, with an asymmetrical blonde haircut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," designer athleisure, where despite never exercising, and an expression of permanent condescension. She had dismissed my evidence, upheld the fine, and made a comment about how some people did not understand the importance of community standards. I had left that meeting frustrated but had paid the fine to avoid escalation. Apparently, Patricia had not forgotten. "She is trying to build a case to kick us out," Jennifer said, reaching the same conclusion I had hours earlier. "If she can document enough violations, she can fine us into oblivion or even force us to sell." "That is exactly what I think," I agreed, "but she messed up by using HOA equipment." "That sticker gave her away." "What do we do?" Jennifer asked. "We gather more evidence," I said. "I want to know everyone involved. I want documentation of everything they are doing, and then we bury them." Over the next week, I became obsessed with the investigation. I set up my own cameras, carefully hidden throughout my property, recording the fence line where the HOA camera was positioned. I wanted to catch someone checking on it or swapping out memory cards. I also started documenting everything in our daily lives with timestamps and video. Every time we were in the backyard, I recorded independently so I would have proof of what actually happened versus what the HOA might claim happened. I also reached out to neighbors, carefully and casually. I started with Tom and Rachel Martinez, who lived 3 houses down. We had always been friendly, sharing waves and occasional conversations about sports or weather. I invited Tom over for a beer one evening while Jennifer had Rachel over for wine. "Can I ask you something?" I said after we had been talking for a while. "Have you guys ever had issues with the HOA? Like fines or violations that seemed unfair?" Tom's expression darkened immediately. "Do not get me started on Patricia Kendrick. That woman fined us 4 times last year. Once because our porch light was out for 2 days while we waited for a replacement bulb. $200 for a burned-out light bulb. Did you ever fight any of the fines?" I asked. "We tried once," Tom said. "Patricia showed up at the next board meeting with photos and videos showing our supposed violations. The evidence looked bad, so we paid." But the weird thing was, some of those violations did not match what I remembered. Like, she had a video of our lawn being overgrown, but I swear I had just mowed the day before the timestamp showed. My pulse quickened. "Did the video look edited to you?" "I do not know much about video editing," Tom admitted. "But something felt off. Why?" I made a decision to trust him. I brought him inside and showed him what I had found. Tom watched the edited videos of my property with mounting anger. "That is exactly what she did to us," he said. "I cannot prove it, but I know our lawn was not that long. She must have done the same thing." "You still have the videos she showed you?" I asked. "No, she just displayed them at the meeting, didn't give us copies. That was convenient for Patricia." No copies meant no way for homeowners to examine the evidence closely or get it analyzed. Rachel and Jennifer joined us, and we filled them in. Rachel was furious. "This is fraud," she said. Rachel was a paralegal at a law firm downtown, and her legal mind immediately went into overdrive. "If she is manufacturing evidence to collect fines, that is criminal fraud, not to mention the illegal surveillance." "I need to find the other cameras," I said. "The one I found was labeled Equipment 3. That means there are at least 2 others, probably more." Over the next few days, Tom and I conducted a subtle search of the neighborhood. We walked around in the evenings, pretending to chat while actually scanning fence lines and common areas. We found 2 more cameras within a week. One was positioned to monitor the Martinez property, tucked into a bush near their back fence. The other was aimed at another house belonging to David and Susan Chen, who had also apparently run afoul of Patricia at some point. I documented both cameras without touching them. This was bigger than just my property. Patricia was running a systematic operation to manufacture violations against homeowners she did not like. I contacted David Chen and found that he had also received multiple questionable fines over the past year. He had even consulted a lawyer about it, but was told that fighting an HOA was expensive and often futile. The legal fees would exceed the fines. What if we had proof the violations were fabricated? I asked him. David's interest piqued immediately. I showed him the evidence I had gathered, and he agreed to join what was becoming a coalition of targeted homeowners. With 4 households now working together, we started building a comprehensive case. Rachel used her legal expertise to research relevant statutes and case law. Tom, who worked in IT, helped me analyze the metadata on the video files to prove they had been edited. Jennifer, with her teacher's attention to detail, organized all our documentation into a clear timeline. 2 weeks after finding the initial camera, I finally caught the break I was waiting for. My hidden cameras captured footage of someone approaching the fence line at 2 in the morning. The figure was careful, using a small flashlight to navigate. They reached the HOA camera, removed it, swapped out the memory card, and replaced it. The video quality was not great in the darkness, but it was good enough. I could see the person's build and general features. It was not Patricia herself. It was a man, probably in his 30s, wearing dark clothes. I did not recognize him. I immediately copied the footage to multiple backups. Now I had proof that someone was actively maintaining this surveillance operation. But I needed to identify who this person was. The next evening, I attended the monthly HOA board meeting. These meetings were open to all residents, held in the community clubhouse near the neighborhood entrance. I had not attended one since the incident 6 months ago, but it was time to show my face and do some reconnaissance. Patricia presided over the meeting from a raised table at the front of the room, flanked by 4 other board members. I recognized them all. Harold Jenkins, a retired accountant who served as treasurer, Deanne Foster, the secretary, Robert Young, who handled architectural reviews, and Marcus Webb, who oversaw grounds and maintenance. About 20 residents attended, scattered among folding chairs. The meeting followed standard HOA procedure, reviewing minutes from the last meeting, discussing budget items, and addressing resident concerns. I sat quietly in the back, observing. Patricia ran the meeting with an iron fist, dismissing questions she found inconvenient and steamrolling anyone who disagreed with her proposals. She reminded me of every petty tyrant who had ever gotten a tiny bit of power and let it corrupt them completely. Then something interesting happened. When discussing maintenance issues, Patricia mentioned they had hired a new contractor for overnight security patrols. She said his name was Derek Simmons, and he would be conducting random checks of the property to ensure compliance with community standards. My mind flashed to the figure on my video. Overnight security patrols, random checks. This Derek Simmons was likely the person swapping out memory cards in the middle of the night. After the meeting, I lingered near the refreshment table, pretending to get coffee while eavesdropping on conversations. Patricia stood nearby talking to Marcus Webb, the board member in charge of grounds and maintenance. "Has Derek been filing his reports on time?" Patricia asked, her voice low. "Every week," Marcus replied, "though I still think we are paying him too much for what he does." "He provides valuable documentation," Patricia said sharply. "His surveillance has caught multiple violations that we otherwise would have missed." Surveillance. She had just admitted it in a semi-public space. I felt a surge of satisfaction. She was getting careless, too confident in her scheme. I left the meeting and immediately shared what I had learned with my growing group of allied neighbors. We now had a name, Derek Simmons. Tom used his IT skills to do some research and found that Derek Simmons had a checkered past. He had previously worked as a private investigator, but had his license suspended 3 years ago for ethics violations involving fabricated evidence in a divorce case. Perfect. Patricia had hired someone with a history of manufacturing evidence to help her manufacture evidence. The irony was almost poetic. We decided it was time to take action, but we needed to be strategic. Rachel advised that we should compile everything into a formal complaint and present it to the HOA board first, giving them a chance to address the situation internally. If they refused or retaliated, then we would escalate to legal action and law enforcement. I spent a weekend preparing a comprehensive package. It included printed stills from the surveillance footage showing the cameras, analysis of the edited videos proving they had been manipulated, timeline documentation showing the truth versus what the HOA claimed, and information about Derek Simmons and his background. I also included statements from the Martinez family and the Chen family, detailing their experiences with questionable finds. The package was 40 pages of damning evidence, all neatly organized and cross-referenced. I made copies for every board member and scheduled an appointment to address the board at their next meeting. The night before that meeting, something happened that changed everything. Jennifer and I were sitting in our living room around 9 at night when we heard a loud crash from the backyard. We rushed out to find that someone had thrown a brick through our patio door. Glass covered the concrete, and the brick sat in the middle of the debris with a note wrapped around it. The note was printed on plain paper. "Drop your complaints or things will get worse." I called the police immediately. 2 officers arrived within 15 minutes and took a report. I showed them the brick, the note, and explained the situation with the HOA. One of the officers, a veteran cop named Sergeant Martinez, no relation to our neighbors, listened carefully. "This is felony criminal damage and threatening/intimidating," he said. "Given the ongoing dispute you have described, we will investigate thoroughly. I suggest you also file for an order of protection if you feel threatened." I provided the police with copies of all my evidence regarding the HOA surveillance and manufactured violations. Sergeant Martinez raised his eyebrows as he reviewed the material. "This is way above my pay grade," he admitted, "but I am going to forward this to our fraud division. What you are describing, if true, is a criminal conspiracy." The next morning, I showed up at the scheduled HOA board meeting with Jennifer, the Martinezes, and the Chens. We were a united front. I also had a lawyer now. Rachel had connected me with her boss, attorney Michael Fitzgerald, who specialized in HOA disputes and had agreed to represent our group. Patricia's expression when she saw all of us walk in with a lawyer was priceless. Her confident smirk faltered for just a moment before she recovered her composure. "This is unusual," she said as we took seats in the front row. "Did someone schedule a presentation?" "I sent an email 3 days ago requesting to address the board," I said calmly. "I have evidence of serious violations of Arizona law by this HOA and certain individuals associated with it." Attorney Fitzgerald stood. "My name is Michael Fitzgerald, and I represent Mr. Rollins and several other homeowners in this community. We are here to formally present evidence of illegal surveillance, fraud, and harassment conducted by members of this board and contractors hired by this board." The room went silent. Other residents who had come for the regular meeting leaned forward with interest. Patricia's face flushed red. "This is highly irregular," she sputtered. "We have not agreed to any such presentation." Arizona law requires HOA boards to allow homeowners to address the board on matters affecting the community, Fitzgerald said smoothly. This certainly qualifies. Now, we can do this here in an open forum, or we can skip straight to filing a lawsuit in Maricopa County Superior Court. Your choice. The other board members looked uncomfortable. Harold Jenkins, the treasurer, spoke up. I think we should hear what they have to say. Patricia shot him a venomous look but nodded stiffly. Fine. You have 10 minutes. I stood and began my presentation, using a borrowed projector to display the evidence on the clubhouse wall. I showed the photos of the hidden cameras. I played the unedited video of my backyard barbecue, then played the HOA's edited version side by side. The difference was stark and undeniable. Gasps rippled through the audience of residents. I showed the video of Derek Simmons servicing the camera in the middle of the night. I displayed the timeline of manufactured violations across multiple properties. I walked through Derek's history of fabricating evidence in his previous career. This is defamation, Patricia finally interrupted, her voice shaking with anger. You cannot prove any of this. Actually, we can, Fitzgerald said. We have the original memory cards with metadata intact. We have independent video documentation. We have sworn statements from multiple homeowners. And as of this morning, we have confirmation that the Scottsdale Police Department has opened an active investigation into fraud and illegal surveillance. That last part was new information even to me, but Fitzgerald had apparently been busy. He handed Patricia a business card. This is the detective assigned to the case. I suggest you contact your own attorney immediately. The charges under consideration include fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, illegal surveillance under Arizona revised statutes, and criminal damage related to the brick thrown through my client's window last night. Patricia went pale. I do not know anything about a brick. Perhaps not, Fitzgerald said, but Derek Simmons has been placed under surveillance by police since last night. If he was involved, they will know. I had not known about that either. Fitzgerald was worth every penny of his fee. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Other residents began shouting questions at Patricia, demanding to know if they had been surveilled as well. Board members argued among themselves. Diane Foster, the secretary, actually stood up and walked out, saying she wanted no part of this. Patricia tried to regain control but failed. Finally, Harold Jenkins made a motion to suspend the meeting and call an emergency session in 1 week. The motion passed with only Patricia voting against it. As we left, Patricia cornered me near the door. You are going to regret this, she hissed. Do you have any idea what you have started? Yes, I said calmly. I started holding you accountable for breaking the law. You should have just left us alone. The next few days were a whirlwind. The police investigation moved quickly. Derek Simmons was brought in for questioning and apparently folded immediately, providing evidence that Patricia had hired him specifically to manufacture violations against homeowners she considered troublemakers. He had been paid cash under the table, money that had come from HOA funds without proper authorization or documentation. That revelation brought Harold Jenkins, the treasurer, into the investigation. He cooperated fully, providing financial records showing that Patricia had been diverting HOA funds to pay for her surveillance operation. She had created fake invoices for landscaping work that never happened, pocketing the money and using it to pay Derek. The charges against Patricia grew more serious. In addition to the surveillance and fraud charges, she now faced embezzlement charges for stealing HOA funds. The total amount was over $15,000 over an 18-month period. Derek was charged as an accomplice, though his cooperation earned him a plea deal. He confirmed that Patricia had ordered him to edit videos to make violations appear worse than they were. He also admitted that he had thrown the brick through my window on Patricia's orders after she learned I had been asking questions around the neighborhood. That admission resulted in additional charges against Patricia for criminal damage and intimidation. The emergency HOA board meeting 1 week later was standing room only. Every homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates seemed to show up, eager to see what would happen. Patricia did not attend. Her attorney sent a letter announcing her resignation from the board effective immediately. The remaining board members voted unanimously to void all fines issued over the past 2 years and to conduct a comprehensive audit of HOA finances. They also voted to ban the use of any surveillance equipment on homeowner property and to revise the enforcement procedures to include an independent review process. Attorney Fitzgerald negotiated settlements on behalf of me, the Martinses, and the Chens. The HOA agreed to pay our legal fees and provide compensation for the harassment and illegal surveillance. The total came to about $30,000 per household, which was paid from the HOA's insurance policy. But the real satisfaction came 2 months later when Patricia Kendrick stood before a judge in Maricopa County Superior Court. The criminal case had moved quickly, partly because the evidence was so overwhelming and partly because Patricia's attorney advised her to accept a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, illegal surveillance, and criminal damage. The judge was not sympathetic. He noted that Patricia had abused a position of trust within her community and had violated the privacy and finances of her neighbors for petty personal reasons. Patricia was sentenced to 18 months in prison, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA for the embezzled funds plus damages. She also had to pay restitution to individual homeowners, including covering all the fines she had illegally collected. Derek Simmons received 6 months in county jail and 2 years probation as part of his plea deal. I attended the sentencing hearing along with Jennifer, Tom, Rachel, and several other neighbors who had been affected by Patricia's scheme. Watching her stand before the judge, no longer the imperious HOA president but just another defendant in an orange jumpsuit, I felt a sense of closure. After the hearing, as we walked out of the courthouse into the bright Arizona sunshine, Jennifer squeezed my hand. "Is it really over?" she asked. "It is really over," I confirmed. Tom clapped me on the shoulder. "You know, when you first told me about that camera, I thought you were paranoid. I am glad you trusted your instincts." "I am just glad we caught her before she did more damage," I said. The aftermath of Patricia's conviction rippled through Meadowbrook Estates for months. The HOA board was completely restructured. New elections were held, and a slate of reasonable, community-minded residents took over. They implemented new bylaws that limited board power and required transparency in all enforcement actions. The new board also voted to eliminate many of the more ridiculous rules that Patricia had championed. Mailbox color restrictions were loosened. The acceptable paint palette for homes was expanded. Garbage can visibility rules were modified to be more reasonable. The community became a more pleasant place to live almost overnight. Several homeowners who had been driven out by Patricia's harassment campaign actually moved back to the neighborhood once word spread about the changes. The property values, which had been declining due to the HOA's reputation, started to recover. As for me, I kept the evidence safely stored, just in case it was ever needed again, though I doubted it would be. I also kept my own security cameras running, though now it was just standard home security rather than defense against a corrupt HOA board. One evening, about 6 months after Patricia's sentencing, Jennifer and I were sitting on our back patio enjoying the sunset. It was the same patio where we had been illegally surveilled, where our private conversations had been recorded without consent. But it felt different now. It felt like ours again. "You know what the best part of this whole thing is?" Jennifer said, sipping her wine. "What is that?" We fought back and won. "How many people get to say that about their HOA?" She was right. HOA disputes usually ended with homeowners either giving up or moving away. Taking on the association, especially one led by someone as determined as Patricia, should have been a losing battle. But we had evidence, we had allies, and most importantly, we had been willing to stand up for what was right. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. He and Rachel were having a barbecue the next weekend and wanted us to come over. The message included a joke about making sure to play music at unreasonable volumes since Patricia was not around to complain anymore. I texted back that we would be there, music and all. Looking back at the whole experience, from finding that first camera to watching Patricia get sentenced, I realized how close we had come to being forced out of our home. If I had not been trimming those hedges that particular morning, if I had not noticed the camera, Patricia's scheme might have worked. She might have succeeded in manufacturing enough violations to fine us into financial hardship or even foreclose on our property. The thought was chilling. How many other HOAs around the country were run by people like Patricia? How many homeowners were being victimized by manufactured violations and selective enforcement? The legal system was supposed to protect people from this kind of abuse, but HOAs operated in a gray area where they had enormous power and little oversight. Our case had made local news, and I had been contacted by several reporters and even a producer working on a documentary about HOA abuses. I agreed to share our story, hoping it might help other homeowners recognize the warning signs of corruption and give them courage to fight back. The documentary aired about 8 months after Patricia's sentencing on a national cable channel. It featured our story prominently, along with interviews with the Martinses, the Chens, Attorney Fitzgerald, and even Sergeant Martinez from the Scottsdale Police. The producer had also found several other cases around the country of HOA corruption, creating a comprehensive look at the problem. After the documentary aired, I received dozens of emails from people in similar situations, asking for advice. I did my best to respond to everyone, sharing the lessons I had learned. Document everything, find allies in your community, do not be afraid to involve law enforcement when crimes are committed, and get a good lawyer who specializes in HOA law. One email particularly stood out. It was from a woman in Nevada, whose HOA president was using tactics remarkably similar to Patricia's. She had found hidden cameras on her property and was terrified of speaking up. I spent an hour on the phone with her, walking through the steps we had taken and connecting her with Attorney Fitzgerald, who had contacts in Nevada. 6 months later, she emailed to tell me that her HOA president had been arrested and the board dissolved. She thanked me profusely, saying our story had given her the courage to act. That email made everything worthwhile. Life in Meadowbrook Estates returned to normal, or at least a new version of normal. The new HOA board was functional but not oppressive. They maintained common areas, enforced reasonable standards, and treated homeowners like adults rather than subjects to be controlled. I even ended up joining the board myself, elected to a 2-year term about a year after Patricia's conviction. I figured someone who had experienced HOA abuse firsthand would be well positioned to prevent it from happening again. My first act as a board member was to establish a homeowner bill of rights that guaranteed due process, prohibited surveillance without consent, and created an independent appeals process for fines. The other board members supported it unanimously. We had all learned the lesson of what could happen when power went unchecked. Jennifer continued teaching, and our life settled into a comfortable rhythm. We hosted barbecues without worrying about manufactured noise complaints. We painted our shutters whatever shade of beige we wanted. We left our garbage cans out for an extra hour on collection day if we needed to, without fear of punitive fines. These might sound like small freedoms, trivial even. But anyone who has lived under an oppressive HOA knows that these small freedoms add up to something larger: the ability to feel at home in your own house. One detail I learned later, almost as an epilogue to the whole saga, was that Patricia's husband had divorced her while she was in prison. Apparently, he had no idea what she had been doing and was humiliated by the public scandal. He moved out of Meadowbrook Estates, selling their house at a loss just to get away from the memories and judgment of neighbors. I felt a small twinge of sympathy for him. He had been collateral damage in Patricia's campaign of petty tyranny. But mostly, I felt relief that she would not be returning to the neighborhood after serving her sentence. Derek Simmons, after serving his 6 months, moved out of state. I heard through the grapevine that he was working construction in New Mexico, having given up any pretense of security or investigative work. His testimony against Patricia had been crucial to the prosecution, and while I could not forgive him for throwing that brick through my window, I understood that he had been a tool used by someone more malicious. The Martinses became some of our closest friends through all of this. Adversity has a way of bonding people, and fighting Patricia together had created a friendship that went beyond casual neighborly waves. Our kids, if we had them in the future, would probably grow up together. Tom joked that we should start a support group for HOA abuse survivors, but we all knew we would rather just forget about it and move on. The one lasting habit I kept from the whole ordeal was my attention to documentation. I still kept detailed records of everything related to our property: maintenance, improvements, HOA communications. Some might call it paranoia, but I called it being prepared. I never wanted to be caught off guard again. About 2 years after finding that first camera, I was trimming the same hedges where this all started. The morning was clear and cool, typical for March in Arizona. I worked methodically, enjoying the simple task of yard work. A new family had moved in across the street the week before, and the husband came over to introduce himself. His name was Greg, and he had a friendly, open face. "Nice to meet you," he said, shaking my hand. "We are excited to be here. The neighborhood seems great." "It is," I said honestly. "The HOA is very reasonable. They just care about maintaining property values without being overbearing about it." "That is good to hear," Greg said. "Our last neighborhood had an HOA president who was a nightmare, constantly fining people for minor things, making up rules as she went along. We were thrilled to get out of there." I smiled, thinking about how close Meadowbrook Estates had come to being exactly that kind of nightmare. "If you ever have any issues with the HOA, just let me know. I am actually on the board now, and we have worked hard to keep things fair and transparent." "I appreciate that," Greg said. "Hey, are those security cameras on your house?" I glanced at the discrete cameras I had installed, still running after all this time. "Yeah, just basic home security. You cannot be too careful." "Makes sense," Greg agreed. He headed back to his house to continue unpacking, and I returned to trimming my hedges. As I worked, I thought about everything that had happened. Finding the camera, the investigation, the confrontation, the legal battle, and finally justice being served. It had been exhausting and stressful, but it had also been empowering. We had stood up to someone abusing their power, and we had won. The hedge trimming finished, I stepped back to admire my work. The bushes were neat and even, well within HOA guidelines, not that anyone was measuring obsessively anymore. My yard looked good, and more importantly, it was my yard, my property, my home. Jennifer came out with 2 glasses of iced tea, and we sat on the patio together. The same patio that had once been under illegal surveillance, now just a peaceful place to relax on a Saturday morning. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, noticing my contemplative expression. "Just appreciating how good we have it now," I said, "and how different things could have been." "Do you ever regret buying a house in an HOA?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. No, the HOA is not the problem. Patricia was the problem. HOAs can be good when they are run by good people with the right intentions. They can maintain property values and create nice communities. It is when someone like Patricia gets power that things go wrong. "Very philosophical," Jennifer teased. "Who knew hidden cameras would turn you into a deep thinker?" I laughed. "I would rather be a deep thinker than a prison inmate, which is what Patricia is." We sat in comfortable silence, enjoying the morning. Across the street, Greg and his family were unloading boxes from a moving truck. In a few weeks, they would be settled in, becoming part of the fabric of Meadowbrook Estates. They would experience the community as it was now, functional, fair, and free from the corruption that had almost destroyed it. That evening, I got an email from Attorney Fitzgerald. He was forwarding a message from a homeowner in California who had seen the documentary and needed help with a similar situation. Their HOA president was using surveillance to manufacture violations, and they wanted advice on how to proceed. I read through their story, seeing echoes of what we had experienced. The same tactics, the same abuse of power, the same fear of speaking up. I typed out a detailed response, sharing everything I had learned and offering to consult with them if needed. As I hit send, I realized that the story that started with me finding a hidden camera in my fence had grown into something larger. It had become a resource for others facing similar struggles. Our victory had implications beyond just our neighborhood. Jennifer looked over my shoulder at the email. Another one, I confirmed. HOA abuse seems to be more common than anyone realizes. "You are becoming an expert in this," she observed. "I guess I am," I said, "though it is an expertise I never wanted. But one that is helping people," she pointed out. She was right. If our experience could help others avoid being victimized or give them the courage to fight back, then maybe all the stress and conflict had been worth it. The months turned into years, and life continued. Meadowbrook Estates thrived under its new leadership. Property values increased. New families moved in, drawn by the reputation of a well-managed community. Old families who had left during Patricia's reign sometimes drove through, seeing the changes and regretting their decision to leave. I served my 2-year term on the board and then stepped down, having done what I set out to do: ensure that proper safeguards were in place to prevent another Patricia from abusing power. The new board members elected after me were committed to maintaining those safeguards. Patricia served her full 18-month sentence and was released on probation. I heard she moved to another state, trying to start over somewhere where people did not know her as the corrupt HOA president who went to prison. I hoped she had learned her lesson, but I suspected that people like her rarely changed fundamentally. They just found new places to exercise their need for control. Derek Simmons I never heard about again after he moved to New Mexico. He had been a minor player, a tool used by Patricia. Without her direction, he was harmless. The hidden cameras were destroyed, of course. The police had kept them as evidence during the trial, and afterward they were disposed of properly. I was glad to know they no longer existed, that no one could ever use them again to violate someone's privacy. My own security cameras remained, though. They were different. They monitored my property for my protection, and I was open about having them. Anyone who came to my house could see the cameras clearly posted. There was no deception, no hidden surveillance, no manufactured evidence. Just honest security. 3 years after finding that first camera, I was sitting in my home office when I received a LinkedIn message from someone named Margaret. She explained that she was a producer working on a follow-up documentary about HOA reform legislation. Our case had inspired lawmakers in several states to propose new laws limiting HOA power and increasing oversight. She wanted to interview me about the impact our story had on the broader conversation about HOA governance. I agreed to the interview, which was conducted via video call. Margaret asked thoughtful questions about what had happened, how we had fought back, and what we thought needed to change systemically. "What advice would you give to someone who suspects their HOA is corrupt?" she asked. "Document everything," I said immediately. Every interaction, every fine, every rule enforcement. Take photos, videos, keep emails. Build a comprehensive record. Then find allies in your community because you are probably not the only one being targeted. Get a lawyer who specializes in HOA law because general practice attorneys often do not understand the unique legal issues involved. And do not be afraid to involve law enforcement if actual crimes are being committed. You think your case was unique, or is this happening in other communities? She asked. I think our case was unique in that we were able to catch Patricia red-handed with clear evidence of her crimes, I said. But I think the underlying dynamic of HOA abuse is happening in communities all over the country. HOAs are given enormous power over people's homes and lives, often with minimal oversight. When someone like Patricia gets into a position of power, they can do tremendous damage before anyone stops them. What needs to change? Margaret asked. There needs to be better oversight of HOA boards, I said. Regular audits, term limits for board members, easier processes for homeowners to recall bad board members, and serious penalties for board members who abuse their power. HOAs should exist to serve the community, not to give petty tyrants a kingdom to rule. The documentary aired 6 months later, and again I heard from people around the country dealing with HOA issues. The tide seemed to be turning, though. More states were passing HOA reform legislation. More lawyers were specializing in homeowner rights. More people were speaking up about abuse rather than suffering in silence. Our case became something of a landmark, cited in legal briefs and legislative debates. The phrase, Meadowbrook Estate Surveillance Scandal, appeared in law review articles and news reports about HOA reform. I never sought that kind of attention, but I was glad our experience was contributing to positive change. Jennifer and I sometimes talked about moving, maybe buying a house without an HOA, but we had fought too hard for Meadowbrook Estates to abandon it now. This was our home, and it was a good home because we had helped make it that way. On the 5-year anniversary of finding the camera, I took a moment to walk around the neighborhood. It was a beautiful community with well-maintained homes, mature trees, and friendly neighbors. Children played in front yards. People walked dogs and waved to each other. It was everything a neighborhood should be. I stopped at the spot on my fence where I had first seen that black device wedged between the slats. The fence had been repaired and repainted since then, and there was no trace of what had been there. But I remembered. I would always remember the mixture of shock, anger, and determination I had felt in that moment. That hidden camera had changed everything. It had exposed corruption, led to criminal convictions, reformed an HOA, and inspired legislation. All because I happened to be trimming hedges on the right morning and noticed something that did not belong. Jennifer joined me in the backyard, following my gaze to the fence. She knew what I was thinking about. "You wish it had never happened?" she asked. "No," I said after a moment. "I wish Patricia had never been corrupt in the first place. I wish Derek had never planted cameras. I wish we had never been targeted. But since all that did happen, I am glad we fought back. I am glad we won." "Me too," she said, taking my hand. We stood there together, in our backyard, on our property, in our home. Free from surveillance, free from manufactured violations, free from the fear of arbitrary punishment. It was a freedom that many people took for granted, but that we would never take for granted again. The sun set over Meadowbrook Estates, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Somewhere, Patricia Kendrick was living whatever life she had managed to build after prison. Somewhere, Derek Simmons was working construction and trying to forget his role in the scandal. Somewhere, other homeowners were fighting their own battles against corrupt HOAs, maybe inspired by our story, maybe not. But here, in this moment, in this place, everything was as it should be. Justice had been served, lessons had been learned, and life had moved on. The hidden camera that had threatened to destroy our peace of mind had instead become the evidence that saved our community. I never wanted to be an HOA warrior or a symbol of homeowner rights. I just wanted to live peacefully in my house. But when that peace was threatened, I fought back with everything I had. And in the end, that made all the difference. As darkness fell and lights came on in houses across the neighborhood, Jennifer and I went inside. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but tonight we were home. Truly, completely, undeniably home. And no hidden camera, no corrupt HOA president, no manufactured violation could ever take that away from us again.